Honey sweet, just like you. Violet's blue. Just like you.
I have all your records. I have even bought some of them twice. Even though my friends in school think I am wrong to find you cool, I don't care because I know you care about who writes to you. I enjoyed the fan club letter, but an autograph would be better. I have heard about your bleeding, but I don't believe in reading. All those rumors can't be true. I hope I meet a friend like you. I play bad until my parents, they tell me go to sleep and dream it. Still I play them soft and low. I sing the words, the ones I know. It feels good to be alive. It feels good to be alive. It feels good to be
Welcome back to Rock and Roll Fashionistas. Last week, Martin Tielli, right? We were talking about the Six Shooter Records, his record label, and they are reissuing, well, it's a brand new record, literally and figuratively, because it's vinyl. The first time it's ever been on vinyl. Tielli's 2001 classic album. We didn't even suspect that he was the poppy salesman. So we started talking about this record last episode, and we meant to do a bit on the Rheostatics, right? Tielli's band. But time did not permit. So today, folks, this is what we're going to delve into in this episode. We're going to give kind of a refresher course, if you will, or an introduction to. Never would we even suggest to call it a master class. Who are we? No, 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 no. An introduction, perhaps, right? Introducing happiness, introducing the rheostatics. The rheostatics are Canada's best kept secret when it comes to music. This is going to sound outrageous, hyperbole, maybe. I don't know. You be the judge. They're Canada's Beatles. But without the mania. There wasn't like a Rheostatics mania. But that level of respect for the craftsmanship, the songwriting, the singing, the instrumentation, the production, it's all there. 1978. We got to go all the way back to 1978 in Etobicoke. Now, anyone who's not familiar with Etobicoke would say Toronto. They're a Toronto band. But people from Etobicoke are going to be like, no, Etobicoke is not Toronto. Etobicoke is Etobicoke. I've only been there a few times. I've never really had the opportunity to delve into the Etobicoke nightlife or the vibrant music community that was there at one point in the 90s. Maybe it's still there. Maybe there are all these fabulous bands who are still based in Etobicoke. If there are, let us know in the comments. We want to know about what you're doing. We want to hear your music. So we're looking forward to that. So 1978, now what was going on in 1978? Punk rock, right? Like that was the big new thing. Kind of started in 76 in England. That's when the Sex Pistols first got together at some point in like midway through 76. There are some like demo rehearsal recordings of the Sex Pistols from 1976. I think you can hear them on the Great Rock and Roll Swindle. That's probably where I heard them first. But there have probably been many archival releases since then. So if you know about them, again, let us know, because I only know it from, like, I had bought Nevermind the Bollocks. Actually, you know what? I just lied. I didn't mean to. It wasn't an intentional fib. I just remembered it wrong. When I was in high school, I had the opportunity to do a little bit of DJing. We had like a radio station that only transmitted on campus, like on our high school campus radio. I was there for a short time. Well, I remember when Queen and Bowie Under Pressure. I remember that 45. I remember that 45 with the red Electra label. I remember that coming into the radio station, and it was highly anticipated because it seemed like Bowie had been gone forever. Like he had done Scary Monsters, which at that point, after the Berlin trilogy, was like his crowning achievement. You know, where is he going to go to next? And then, like, we didn't hear from him for a bit. I think it was a contractual thing because he had been on RCA Records for the better part of a decade, and his contract was probably up. You know, he put out like Christian F, that soundtrack to that movie. There are a couple of like, I think they were like contractual obligation records that he put out. Anyway, that's besides the point. I'm at this, you know, high school radio station. I've done a little bit here and there. And my favorite band at the time was the Sex Pistols. You know, their music really spoke to me, really got me going. Like I could feel it in my gut. It just made me wanna not dance. I don't know what it made me want to do. It spoke to me on a gut level, this music. I found it very empowering. I was a very shy, introverted, sensitive kid. I still am, actually. You'd never know, but I am. This music helped bring me out of my shell. It gave me a little courage to bring me out of my shell and to maybe, let the world know that, look, I know who I am. I was like 14, 15 years old. And up until that point, like, I didn't buy my own clothes. I had no sense. I had no kind of identity. And then I heard this music and I caught wind of this culture, this punk rock culture. And I could identify with it. It became kind of my teenage identity. It empowered me, and I wanted to let the world know about it. Even though I was like this shy kid, I did not want to draw attention to myself, but I also wanted to dress in a way that reflected the music that I loved and the culture I was all about. So we kind of like started morphing into like these like, punk rock kids, like this small little group of kids that I hung with. Anyway, we could do a whole episode on that because we took a lot of crap from like everybody. We all got beat up for looking different, for being different. Anyway, it was not an easy time to be a young person in a predominantly rural environment. I mean, I remember when I got an earring, and that was during this phase, my punk rock phase. And I had a buddy came over, and he, we had like a sleepover. He had an earring, and I thought, man, that's cool as you know what. And so he was over having a sleepover. And so we got like the ice cube tray, got a couple of ice cubes, and then, put them up on my earlobe and to freeze it. And then got like one of my mom's like, well, it was like a needle. I don't know what it was for. We used it to poke a hole in my frozen ear anyway. So we did that, got it was just a stud. It was like a small, like stainless steel stud. I probably still have it kicking around somewhere. Anyway, so this was like the weekend. So Monday morning, I get on the bus and everyone is freaking the frig out. Like I'm sitting like, I don't know if they have seatbelts now, but like back then on the bus, like you're sitting on like these benches, like, cushiony benches, but benches all the same. I think they fit like two kids. So I don't have the window seat. I'm on the outside, and all these kids are like running up and down the aisle, like pointing at my ear and saying, "Oh my God, like look, that freaked people out." And of course, back then, the kids only made one association with that at the time, and it had to do with your sexual orientation. And that's a whole other thing altogether, too. We don't have near enough time for that. So the Rheostatics, 1978, punk rock. The band forms in 1978, but guess what? It takes like almost 10 years for them to come out with an album. And do you know what they called their very first album? It's a brand new band for all intents and purposes. So it's 1987, and their first album is called Greatest Hits. That's some serious nads, right? Greatest Hits. Fabulous. Now, their follow-up album comes out like 4 years later. It's called Melville. It was on Intrepid Records, which is an independent record label at the time. It was probably a one-off. Like they just, I don't think it was a record deal. They just, the record company, Intrepid Records, put out their album Melville. And it's interesting because, like, where do you know that word from? Well, most of us probably know it from Moby Dick, right? Like Herman Melville. But then the Rheostatics, when people said, why did you name your album after the Moby Dick guy? And they're like, well, no, actually, yeah, that's part of it. But then there's Melville, Saskatchewan, because the Rheostatics crisscross the country many times, touring the country in these small digs, what we used to call old man bars. I don't know if they're still around anymore. Like that was back in the day when like it was the bars were smoke filled and with old men predominantly drinking and very, very cheap, like not much over $1. The Empire Hotel, right? Talking about Saskatchewan, Joni Mitchell singing about the Empire Hotel. Well, the Rheostatics played the Empire Hotel and every other hotel across the country. Those hotels where like there's a dingy bar downstairs and then there's rooms for let, daily, weekly, monthly, like seems like a little, like when you walk in, people look at you funny. I don't know. Like, I don't know if these places are still around. I quit drinking like 12, 13 years ago. Again, another long story. We'll just leave that there right now. But yeah, that was like a different era, a different time. So I don't know if these places exist anymore. But if they do exist, they wouldn't exist the same way that they existed back then because you got to go outside to smoke, right? So whatever it is that you're up to, it's got to stop. You got to put it there, you got to put it right there and then go outside. Everything grinds to a halt. You have a smoke because you need your influx every 3 hours of nicotine. Man, crazy drug. Nicotine is crazy. Sir Walter Riley, right? Remember him? He's basically the guy who kind of, I don't know like the whole story. I'm not an historian. I'm the first person to admit that. But he's kind of like the guy who invented the cigarette because, he was over in North America and the Aboriginal people in North America, they used tobacco as a ceremonial thing, right? Like they weren't like standing around smoking cigarettes all day, having a cigarette like every 3 hours. Because like if you're a smoker, that it's like that's about as far, as long as you can go without getting your fix. Like, you need a fix every 3 hours. And if you're drinking, forget about it. You know, that's why the person who's minding your table, they keep emptying the ashtray, because they don't want to remind you of how long you've actually been there and how much money you've just spent drinking and smoking in their establishment. Guaranteed. I mean, last time when I checked, it was well over $100. And, you know, you buy a couple pounds, right? I don't miss it. I don't regret it. I don't miss it either. So Melville, Saskatchewan. So the cats and the Rheostatics, they're like, well, yeah, Herman Melville and Moby Dick, but also there's Melville, Saskatchewan, and then there's Louis Melville. Okay. 1999. Louis Melville made one of the most outstanding albums ever made in this country. It's called Not Really a Bluegrass Album. And if you want to hear the album, you're not in luck, because I just searched for it not too long ago. It was a little bit of research. You know, I don't just freestyle these things. I know it seems like it. I mean, I generally have an idea of where I'm going to go and what I want to talk about. And then things just get out of hand. It's just the way it goes. But I do a little prep. Okay, you're just going to have to take my word for it. So I looked it up, you know, on the streaming things. So no luck. I kid you not. I went to one of the streamers. I looked him up. He was there. He did not, at the time, have a single follower. It said followers and it said 0. So you know what? I followed. So if you go to Spotify and you look up Louis Melville and it says follower 1, that's me. I can say it. You know what? Back in the day, I was number 1. Louis Melville, I was there first. Anyway, you know, go if you stream, go to his stream him, click the contact us thing or whatever and say, "Lou, Not Really a Bluegrass Album, 1999. We need it." I looked it up on Discogs. There are a few copies, like physical copies of the album, that you can buy on Discogs. I think they'll probably run you about $25. Not on YouTube. So this is an album. It is not online. So A, you're just going to have to take my word for it, and B, you're going to have to pay for it, because it's not like when things are online and they're free. That was the worst thing about music. Like, it got digitized with the CD, right? It was all analog before, and then it got digitized. So it was broken down into binary code, 1s through 0, 0 through 1. And the second it was digitized, that paved the way for it to be streamed and shared illegally and for nothing, right? So music, because of the digitization of music, when music became digital and with file sharing, music became worthless in the sense that it was free. It was not paid for, so it had no monetary worth. Music became worthless. And we're trying to rebuild that. Not just us, but, you know, like anyone who has a passion for music and who wants to continue to hear new music by new emerging artists who are going to be creating art that is a reflection of our time and our era. I know that what's really big right now, with the streaming is you have all these albums and songs that are 50 and 60 years old that are like cracking the top 10 now. So if you're a new emerging artist, you're competing with Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and Elton John and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, for all those like spots in the top 10, you know? It's crazy. Like 50 and 60 years old. Growing up like in the 1970s and early 80s, we weren't listening to music from the 1920s or the 1930s. Everything we listened to was new. It was brand new. That was the focus. What was new? I remember when disco was new. When disco like just took over the charts. It exploded and everybody's doing disco. Everybody's dropping on the bandwagon. The Stones did disco, right? And McCartney did a little bit of disco, and Kiss, right? Made for Lovin' You, Cher, like Take Me Home, like everybody. Well, you see, Cher up until then, like she's like Massacre on the Dance Floor diva now. Madonna, all those giants, EDM. But back then, Cher was known as a rock artist. So when she did, and she was like, Allman Brothers, right? Like how more rock and roll can you get? And then she did the big disco song, which I love. I loved it then. I love it now. Ring My Bell. Love it. Loved it then. Love it now. There was a big movement at that time. It was called the Disco Sucks movement. And I remember like being, like how like every year you get like an exhibition in the summertime, like with rides and games and stuff. And, we'd get that here too in the summertime, towards the end of the summer. It kind of marked the end of the summer. And there was this kid, like younger, much younger than me. Like I was probably 12. And I'd say this kid, I'd say he was 10, but he was barking at a game. Not barking like a dog, but like that's what they call a carnival barker, Look it up. Anyway, and he was wearing a t-shirt that said Disco Sucks. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, like that's, man, like I can't, because, it's odd because that saying, it started with Disco Sucks. And then after that, it just became something that people said when something was bad. Oh, that sucks, right? So it became just part of the regular vernacular, right? But what I was thinking when I saw it at the time was what it actually meant, right? Which was at the time kind of a homophobic slur, which over the years has kind of been lost. And but again, that's a whole other story. But and then Louis Melville and his 1999 album, not really a bluegrass album, which I have the album, but it's in storage. Every time I move, my collection gets boxed up and put somewhere, whether it's like an attic or a garage or the basement, somewhere that is not easily accessible. And I might actually have to rebuy the thing on Discogs because normally, like, when I have an album, when I have a CD, I rip it. I rip it onto I have an external hard drive. I can't recommend them highly enough because, computers die, right? Frequently, laptops, notebooks, whatever, they die. So, put it on an external hard drive. I'm just saying, if you're going to get an external hard drive, which I highly recommend for your music collection, if you're like downloading files, and it's an easy way to always know where your stuff is, right? That's why I can't find my Lewis Melville, Not Really a Bluegrass album, because when I bought the album, when it came out 25 years ago, I didn't have a computer. So I couldn't just like rip records, but now whenever I get a record, I rip the record into my external hard drive. Anyway, Melville. Why'd they call it Melville? Well, there you go. It's a trifecta, right? Lewis Melville from the record company Dave's Records of Guelph. Now, Guelph is like an kind of predominantly, well, it's a university town. It's like and they do a lot of expertise in agriculture and stuff like that out there. It's a cool, funky university town. They've got a fabulous music festival out there. Hillside, is that what it's called? The Hillside Festival? If it is, drop us a comment. Let us know what the roster is this coming year. That is if it's still on. I hope it is. It went on for years and years. You always used to be able to see Lewis Melville at the Guelph Music Festival. So Dave, that's Dave Tycrob. Okay, he's Dave. He's the actual Dave of Dave's Records of Guelph. Or you can just call it Drog, D-R-O-G, Drog Records. So, but before the Rheostatics, who, don't worry, we haven't forgotten that's who we're talking about, and that's what this episode is all about. So after the one-off of the Melville album in 91 on Intrepid Records, they got signed. They got signed by Sire Records. So that's like big time because they're owned by Warner Music. So this is like a deal. This is a sweet deal. So, they got a pretty good track record, right? Like the band puts out their first album, Greatest Hits. They put it out themselves, independent. The second record, Melville, is put out by a record label. So it's not self-financed. It's on Intrepid Records. And then by the time they get to the third one, they're signed. They've got a record deal. And as far as I can tell, it was a 3-album deal. And why I say that is because they did 3 albums for Sire Records. And they actually got flown down to Nassau, Bahamas, to the Compass Point Studios to record their very final album for Sire Records, which was Introducing Happiness. That's 1994. But before then, okay, so Paul Quarrington wrote this fabulous novel called Whale Music. And it's basically written about a guy who's basically kind of like Brian Wilson. It's like Quarrington took the concept of Brian Wilson, like this at one time famous teen idol rock star with like his fabulously popular like surf pop music, and then he has like this like decline in his mental faculties. He's retired from society so to speak. And he's he's a recluse. He's reclusive, and he's partaking in substances which are not good for his mental health. So that's kind of that's the world that Quarrington's novel Whale Music starts off. That's the starting point for that novel. Well, the band, the Rheostatics, were so taken by this novel that they named their next record after the novel, Whale Music, from 1992. So, in the span of 1 year, from 1991 with Melville and 92 with Whale Music, you have what are considered two of the greatest Canadian albums ever recorded. Full stop. Let that resonate for a second or two. If you haven't heard them, you truly are in for a real treat. I'm always envious of people who get to explore an artist for the first time. Well, the author, Quarrington, now he heard the album Whale Music, and they were actually making a film of the novel. So he asked the band if they would compose and record music for the film, which they did. So now 2 years later, their next album is music from the motion picture Whale Music. And the very same year, 1994, Introducing Happiness, which actually gave birth to their one and only hit single, top 40, Claire. And what's fabulous about this song is that basically the script for the film, based on the novel, called on the band to write a hit song, because there's a song that is composed by the lead character, which is a hit song. So in effect, the Rheostatics were given the task of composing a hit song. And you know what? It did become a hit. Their only hit. The Rheostatics, they are an album and a beginning, middle, and an end. You know, you don't listen to snippets of, unless it's the live album, which is where we come in. It's very easy for the Rheostatics to not be on your radar. They weren't on my radar until I started working at the record store in 95. I had just graduated college in Montreal, the theater program there. I had moved to Toronto so that I would see my name up in lights, but I had to get a day job. But you know what? I was lucky because they were looking. I read it in the newspaper because there was no internet then. So, you're looking in the classified section, help wanted. There was this teeny little ad, cashiers wanted, ask for Tom. So I went down. And anyway, I won't bore you with the details. I got the job. It was in Soundtracks. The store manager liked the fact that I had just graduated from theater school and asked me if I knew anything about soundtracks and musicals. Well, of course I do. Which, I had a working knowledge, but I'll be honest, I played it up a bit, but I got the gig. So, I went on from there, But I still didn't really know anything about the Rheostatics until their album Double Live came out. So you can't miss this album because the cover of the album is the famous guitar that Martin Tielli has. It's the double neck guitar that's got like it's got the blue maple leaf because like back in the day it was like 67 because up until then Canada just didn't have its own flag, didn't have its own constitution, didn't have its own flag. And so at the time, the political party that was in power, I won't mention who because I don't want to plug anybody, but they went on a hunt for a flag. Like, let's design a flag for our country. And they had like contests and stuff. I don't remember this firsthand. I was like 1 years old, right? So it did not affect me in the least. But anyway, so, and one of the suggestions was like this like maple leaf, but it was blue, and it was like a dual maple leaf. And I guess Tielli, who's well, he's a graphic artist himself, a tremendously accomplished visual artist, as well as a composer, electrifying guitar player, performer. There's no end to the man's talent. He must have seen, in his travels, this design, this proposed double blue maple leaf, but it's like a powder blue, like a baby blue. Like it's not the blue like the Toronto Maple Leafs blue. It's not that blue at all. That's the image he has on his famous double neck guitar, which is the cover of their album Double Live. Now, in the record store back in the day, we used to have get this, it's kind of cool. We actually had an art department. We had a full-time artist. Both the Sams that I worked at, because I worked at the main one in Toronto and I worked at the one in Halifax on Barrington Street. And both shops had a full-time artist. And they would make these fabulous displays. Like just eye-popping, just fabulous. You walked in the door and then boom, you got hit in the face with like just this fabulous graphic that instantly drew you to the rack because it just created excitement, and you wanted to know like what's on this rack, and you don't get that when you're streaming, but that's like a record store thing. I think they still do it, to a much on a smaller scale, I guess, but yeah, they still do it. Anyway, so the cat who was like the store artist, well, guess what? Today he is a very well-respected rock and roll author by the name of Robert Lawson. Now, Robert has 4 books that I know of, maybe even more. You can buy them on Amazon and probably at all fine retail book establishments. So he's got Wheatfield Empire, The Listener's Guide to the Guess Who, Solidarity Forever, The Art and Soul of Stevie Van Zandt. Lots of great stories about him. Rasmus Snaz, The Listener's Guide to Nazareth, and Still Competition, The Listener's Guide to Cheap Tricks. So there you go. Those are Robert's books. He's all over social. Look him up. Always a great informative read. Anyway, at the time, before he had written these books, he was the full-time artist. And happened to be a very big Rheostatics fan. And so he's the guy who introduced me to this band because I had heard the name. Like, you couldn't escape the name in the 90s, especially in Toronto, or just like, CanCon indie rock. You're going to hear the name, the Rheostatics. They played quite often live back in those days. I remember at the time locally, Robert's two big ones were a Bourbon Tabernacle Choir and Rheostatics, and Jack Soul as well. He introduced me to Jack Soul. But I digress. So Robert had made this fabulous, eye-popping display for when a double live came out in 97. And that was my introduction to the Rheostatics. And at that time, after Sire had dropped them after the three albums, you know what they said? They said, we can't market them. So, how lame is that? Here you've got you've basically got the Beatles, right? You've got like a band that has the musical integrity and intelligence of a band on the scale of the Beatles, like with that level of creativity and originality. And you're like, I don't know. I don't know how to market it. So rather than rise to the challenge, we're just going to give up, which is what they did. So sadly, Sire dropped them. But the only good thing that happened when they got dropped by Sire is that back then, what they would do is when they discontinued an album, they would sell all these records back to the record stores. And in books, they call them remainders. We just called them like cutouts or sales stock. Anyway, so the three Sire albums, we were selling them brand new at the store for $5, because they were like remainders. They were like the CD equivalent of remainders. Cut out, you could identify them because they were either sawed, right? Like literally, like they took the plastic covers and they held them up to like a rotary saw and sawed the thing, or put a big hole in it. Like that's what they used to do with the records. You get the records with the circular hole through it. It's like, why is there a hole in my record? It's because it was sales stock. It was a remainder, or it was a promo copy. But usually with the promo copies, they were actually stamped promo copy. This record is the property of, and then it would say, the record label. And by the way, when you're shopping for records, used records, and you happen to see one that's got that promo copy stamp on it, pick it up, because they were always the best pressings. They were the very first pressings that came out of an album. That's why they're promo pressings, because they're advanced promotional copies right at the very beginning of the first run of a record. And the very first run of a record is always going to sound better than, say, the 1000th run of an album before they have to make fresh new plates. Guaranteed, they always sound great. Even if the record's scratched, it doesn't matter. It won't affect the integrity of the original sound pressing. So this was a very, very great time to be a fan of the Rheostatics. I got to see them a whole bunch of times. They were still playing quite frequently back then, in and around the turn of the century. I was able to buy their 3 masterpiece records from Sire, with the introduction on Double Live from Dave's Records of Guelph, because that's who they were recording for now. on the small indie label. And actually, Drog somehow I believe they managed to buy back the 3 Sire albums from Warner. And then so Drog in turn put out their own versions of, well, it's the same album. It's not like Taylor Swift. Like the albums weren't re-recorded. It's just, you know, instead of saying Sire Records distributed by Warner Music, it's going to say Drog Records, Dave's Records of Guelph. In either case, it's the same record. They're all brilliant records. Now, they followed that up with, which is what I consider their Sergeant Pepper. Okay. It's a kid's album. Well, it's marketed as a kid's album. There's a story that involves a couple of kids, and there's actually like a little book. And so there's like drawings, like it's an actual story. Like the CD came out with in like a hardcover book form with like the characters, so the graphics, the drawings, plus the written story, plus the music. And it was called The Story of Harmolodia. And this is like complicated, sophisticated pop music. And I was so fortunate in that I got to see the show where they first premiered live the music from this album. Now, this was new music that they had composed, that they had recorded. So they had to really concentrate. This was like complicated new music. This wasn't like, you know, Legal Age Life at Variety Store. You know, this wasn't like a song that they had played hundreds of times and could do it in their sleep, which was always fabulous about the Rios, because they always, after they play what they want to play with their set, then they just turn to the audience and like, what do you want to hear? So the same thing was true as they were premiering the music from their brand new album. So Turn of the Century, 1999, The Story of Harmolodia. And you could see them on stage. They constantly had their eyes on one another because they were that focused and that concentrated on not making a mistake. And musicians will often look for visual cues from their counterparts on stage. It's fascinating. It's one of the truly lovely things about being present for a live concert. Watching the interplay with the musicians and watching them give the physical cues and the nods and where are we going? Where are we going with this? Are we ending up soon? You know, what's happening? What are we doing? Fascinating. It was one of my most truly enjoyable experiences of seeing music performed live, over and above just Martin Tielli. You know, you haven't lived until you have been in the same room in the presence of Martin Tielli performing music. It is going to be one of the most worthwhile musical experiences you will ever have. And on that note, we're going to leave it there. Now, the Rheostatics story did not end there, but we're just going to end this chapter at the height of their musical powers at the turn of the century, 1999, with the brilliant A Story of Harmolodia. Now, in the new century, they went on to make 2 or 3 other outstanding albums. They broke up. All of the members went on to various other music projects. And then within a decade or so, they regrouped and have since they regrouped, they have made one album. It's 2019. Here Come the Wolves. And it has this fabulous cover, which is kind of a take on the Alex Colville painting, that stunning image of the horse stampeding towards an oncoming train. And this is Tielli's take on that concept with a wolf. We're going to leave it there. At this time, we want to thank you, the listener, for spending this time with us. We truly appreciate you checking in every week. It's why we do it. We want to thank Cooper, the comfort dog, as always, fast asleep, just thoughtful and quiet as ever, minding his own business in dreamland. He's not yappy. He's not, he's not giving me a hard time if it's anything or something that he needs. He's there. He's quiet. He's resting. He's great company. He's my best friend. Thank you, Cooper, the comfort dog. I couldn't do it without you. We want to thank Carver Bob, as always, Brother Tommy, Swami Bill, and we want to thank Sterling, the eternal sound tech. And we want to thank you. Now, remember, kids, like we always say, don't forget, you got to wash your rice bowl. You got to brush your teeth. And remember, we may not always get it right, but we get it good. Thank you for listening.
You are a treasure, you'll never be found, gathering coral in a galleon, seeding on enemies, feeding the reef in some lagoon in Barbados. And I must retrieve you, for I will get paid and build a big house in Vancouver town, living in castle a bit at a time, walking the borders of countries. You be in these shoes and I'll be in those. Do you see dots when I'm talking? One lemon, two lemons, one rosy peach, 6 lonely souls, and a moron. My mind is a porpoise, alone on a beach, counting the waves as it's dying.